Welcome to the Freight Project Podcast, brought to you by Ceresys, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management, technology, and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project Podcast episode, I welcome Dan Lane, the team lead for Team Superior, one of our customer service teams here at Ceresys. As with any first-time guest, you'll get to know Dan's extensive personal background as an expert in the logistics industry for a number of years, as well as his extensive family background. On the episode, Dan and I will have a great discussion around best practices and tips for effective freight invoice auditing and the importance of going about freight invoice auditing. First, Dan will share our team approach to customer service at Ceresys and what each team member is doing on each team. Dan then explains, so other shippers can model, what types of auditing we do for our customers in detail. Dan will also answer why is freight invoice auditing important for shippers to do more often than not, and if freight invoice auditing is a reactive type of practice, or perhaps something shippers should be more proactive about. Moving along, Dan will then provide some insights on consideration shippers should make when it comes to the auditing of freight invoices. Next, Dan will provide how to work with carriers to fix exceptions or variances found in freight invoice auditing, and we'll follow that up with the benefits to shippers who do more freight invoice auditing. Then finally, Dan offers what he would say to those shippers who aren't actively thinking about freight invoice auditing and what that could mean to their business long term. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project Podcast. Well, hello, Dan, and thanks so much for being on as a valued subject matter expert on the Freight Project Podcast. As with any first-time guests, let's first get to know who you are. So if, Dan, you could please explain to all of our great listeners of the Freight Project Podcast out there what you do here at Ceresys and your experience in the logistics industry.
All right. Thanks, Adam, for having me. I am the customer service team lead for Team Superior. I lead one of the three teams of auditors and customer specialists that our primary responsibility is to audit and review invoices for our assigned group of Ceresys customers. I have been around the logistics industry pretty much my entire life. My grandfather was a driver. My dad is an owner-operator with his own semi. My younger brother has now been driving for over 5 years. I have an uncle that's a driver. It's kind of in my family's blood. So,
yeah, clearly, my friend. Wow. So this is the 41st episode, and I think your combined experience, and let's take out age because that's not fair, because there have been some folks that have been in the industry like Naral and Roger as an example for decades. But if we combine family plus you might have the most of anybody here. But it doesn't stop there, does it, Dan? You actually have even your own experience. Tell us a little bit about that.
I started my logistics experience working as the receiving manager at Sears at the Mall of America. After that, went to C.H. Robinson, kind of on a whim of needing to get out of retail and wanted to learn the back end of the industry since my dad had been in it forever. So I've heard a lot of the fun front end stuff he has to deal with. After a couple years there, I decided to find a company closer to my house. And a previous coworker mentioned that Ceresys was hiring for positions similar to what I did at CH. So I was hired on at the freight desk originally to route shipments, doing our inbound freight. I wanted to get back to being on the back end invoicing side, not so much on the front side of operations, and jumped over to the first open CSR position available. And through growth and changes in our industry and company led to me becoming a lead.
So you're leading all the teams or leading your team there, the customer service reps, and you guys, since you first started, have taken now this new team approach where you specialize different disciplines. So let's get a little bit into that. I think that's pretty key as the industry has grown, and especially over the last 5 years, Ceresys has exponentially grown as we continue to add more value on our technology side and our solution side. And so it's really created a need to kind of focus on not just a general customer service approach, but a specialized customer service approach. And so as a team lead on one of our teams, Team Superior, and named Team Superior because the headquarters of Ceresys is in the great state of Minnesota, land of a million lakes, 1,000 lakes, but a lot of lakes. And so, of course, the teams are named after some of those lakes over there, and you're on Team Superior. So let's talk a little bit about those roles. Can you tell our listeners a bit about the teams and which members are on each team and kind of a little bit about what they do?
So when I first started on the team, or before we even had the team concept, we had one person was in charge of handling their assigned set of accounts. We realized that probably wasn't very customer service oriented, and we reorged and divided everyone up into teams so that instead of one person in charge of and trying to manage the invoicing for an account, that knowledge was spread amongst a group of individuals. So not only did it divide up the knowledge, it also divided up the workload so that if and when one person is out, others are able to seamlessly still help the customer when they need it. Invoices still flow through to our customers and get processed. The teams are then divided into two groups, auditors and customer specialists. The auditors are the first group that review an invoice. They audit the freight bills and are auditing those freight bills that have variances. These variances can happen due to several reasons. Carrier billing incorrectly, our rater, unfortunately, may have been set up incorrectly. Variances due to re-rates, such as reways, reclasses, accessorial additions. Sending letters of authorization, requesting the carrier to bill us instead of another party. Obtaining PODs for customers that need them. Every invoice in our system has to have a Ceresys BOL for it. So for shipments that aren't rated by the customer or the freight desk, the auditors will create a BOL. And the last thing they kind of do is process invoice adjustments due to corrected invoices, changes that the carrier made where our customer is getting a reduction. Now, customer specialists are responsible for reviewing the invoices that the auditor has stop. I put that word in there and I knew I was going to stumble over it.
Dispositioned. Yes. That's a tough one.
Customer specialists are responsible for reviewing invoices that the auditor has dispositioned as a re-rate to the customer. They review to determine if the charges should be billed out, absorbed as a satisfaction, or if there's a training opportunity with our customer. So if there's something they are doing that is inflicting these additional charges that we can mitigate and prevent from happening in the future. They also handle customer disputes. So if a reway or reclass took place, but the customer has proper documentation to dispute it, they are our group that goes back to the carrier and fights on their behalf. The customer specialist may see trends within a customer due to the nature of their re-rates. They will have that conversation with the customer when necessary and involve the sales rep regarding those trends to see what we can do to help them out. Customer specialists help set up new customer profiles, new locations, and also help set up the various configurations that are available in the rater. The last thing specialists do is if a customer short pays an invoice or tells us they're disputing it when the payment comes in from accounting. Accounting marks the pro as disputed, and the specialist reaches out to the customer and tries to come to a resolution if it's going the path of a dispute with the carrier or reaching out to the sales rep to see how they want to handle that shipment.
Wow, that's like having a small battalion on your team to really fight the exceptions that occur in shipping. but also the proactive nature of making sure things are set up correctly, as well as mitigating future occurrences by, simply training the customer or letting them be aware of common issues that maybe they couldn't see on their own. So our shippers, I think, have really gotten a lot out of the team approach versus that one person approach. And it's really not only streamlined our own operations, but our shippers' operations. And that's really key. And for today's discussion, I want to kind of really hone in on that auditing side, the first group that you mentioned within the team. Can you share what types of auditing we do for our customers a bit more in detail? Now, you mentioned a few of those different variances and ways that we look at that, but can you talk about how we go about that and kind of the strategy and maybe, what are the desired outcomes that we're looking to see happen ultimately long-term with invoice auditing and that discipline that we provide our shippers?
So we have set up with carriers exclusive pricing agreements with discounted rates, discounted accessorials, and that is what customers see when they rate a shipment in our system. They are seeing what we have set up. We audit against the BOL that the customer created or the freight desk created or what BOL they used when they gave it to the carrier. We hold the carrier accountable for billing accurately their discounts, their rates, their minimums, the accessorials, weights, class, per whatever document was provided to them when it was picked up. Due to the rates being loaded into the system by Ceresys employees, we also have to audit to make sure we are setting up the rater correctly so they're getting what rate they should expect. When we do see variances due to re-rates, such as reways, reclasses, and accessorial additions, we verify the carrier has provided some kind of documentation or proof that these additional charges are valid. If there's a variance for a weight or class change, we go to their site, email them, call them, and really hound them for that additional documentation to support whatever change they are trying to bill us. If they're billing for a liftgate or inside delivery, we hold them accountable for proof that that service was actually provided at the time they received the product.
That seems like going into a lot of detail, and if I was a shipper, let's say 2018, and I'm dealing with a really tight full truckload market, capacity's tight. And then LTL capacity is even tight as people deconsolidate and, break down some of that full truckload just to get some, room for their freight. So, it really is tough with those kinds of market forces. And then you have, increasing customer expectations as they, even in a B2B world, expect their freight to be shipped problem-free and fast and a low cost. Can shippers on their own without a team like a Ceresys helping them out audit invoices regularly? And why is it important that they should, even if they don't have time? And is it always going to be reactive type of practice, or is this something they should be more proactive about? What do you think, Dan?
Well, you kind of hit on it with the rising freight costs is an area of concern for all shippers, even third parties too. Auditing is important for all shippers to do to help prevent a rise in freight charges that may not be valid. As much as carriers try to automate processes, there is always going to be a human element and mistakes can happen. Mistakes can happen by applying the wrong pricing, the wrong weight, an incorrect accessorial, just because of human nature. You fat-fingered it, mistyped it, even miscoded it. It's going to happen. By auditing, it's a way to be proactive with your invoices. Auditing your invoices, you could also find patterns or issues in your own internal processes. Your scale could be off. Your product weight may have changed through a process internally that wasn't communicated out. specific needs of customers that incur additional costs that was not originally factored into the quote from sales, like a liftgate or inside delivery. This would give you the awareness to ask for that additional service on future shipments to that customer up front to make sure you are getting the best rate possible.
Yeah, nobody wants to make a mistake, but it happens. Whether it's accidental or just from simply not knowing the correct way. And you might start off reactive, right? Because you had so many problems and you finally throw your hands up and say, we got to do something about this. And it might be painful to start that initial program, but it's all about execution, right? And discipline. And you really move from that reactive nature of auditing simply by starting out being reactive. The point being, shippers should audit their invoices, whether it's in-house or reaching out to a partner to help them in that. Because, if mistakes are happening and that's creating higher costs than needed in today's world with, great technology to help us out, it should be considered unacceptable. But there's a lot of challenges and we get that. We've gotten that ourselves and we've had to, figure out a system, and now we extend that system to our customers. And so when a shipper is, really saying, okay, yeah, it's time for me to go about the business of auditing better, or they partner with a 3PL. What are some of the considerations that a shipper should make when it comes to auditing freight invoices?
Unfortunately, not all changes to an invoice are mistakes by the carrier. There are times additional charges are going to happen and are going to be valid. Additional services like limited access and residential fees that are going to occur and are typically not disputable, whether they are notated on a POD or not, due to how carriers' contracts are worded. So a lot of shipments, you may not think it's going to a residence or a limited access facility like a school. Even though there's a dock there, it still is coded as limited access. So if there's a business out of a home, a residential fee would be valid. It is one of those things that it's going to happen. Whereas a weight or class change, we can often use proof of commodity and the shipment information to go back to the carrier and dispute the charges. Just because an invoice was changed, it is not final until everything's been paid and months afterwards. Normally, they're not going to go back, but right away is when we can normally push back on them. We can always ask a carrier to review it and ask for changes to be made. They may tell us no at times, but there's never any harm in asking. They can unfortunately do the same thing and review the invoices at a later time and send out a corrected invoice with changes they find that they may have missed upon their original billing.
That's right. We all make mistakes. It goes both ways. At the end of the day, carriers, 3PLs, shippers, we all got to work together to make sure we're doing everything as optimized as possible, error-free as possible, because errors on either side create more cost. More cost on a carrier side may mean next year that their general rate increase is a higher percentage than it would have. So I think it behooves both shipper, carrier, and often us 3PLs in the center to make sure that when we audit invoices that we're, making things correct, even if that, may mean a carrier coming back with their own invoice. But knowing that collaboration and effective long-term relationships are really what make a difference long-term in streamlining operations in freight management and reducing overall costs for all parties. Can you tell us a little bit more about how to work with carriers to kind of fix some of these exceptions or variances found in freight invoice auditing?
Yeah, if it's a pricing discrepancy, as long as you have an agreement with the carrier, it's normally pretty easy to go back to them and get them to fix it immediately, because you have a documented, cut and dry proof that, hey, this is what the pricing should be. This is what we agreed to. Now, if that variance is due to a reweigh, a reclass, or an accessorial, they're going to provide documents or reasoning that the changes that they made are valid. This a lot of times requires us to go back to our customers to get information to support what they actually put on the BOL. Often, we will ask the customer to provide a spec sheet, catalog page, web page, brochures, something that shows the product's dimensions and weight. A lot of times we'll ask for a packing slip, because just because you give us a catalog page, that doesn't show what actually shipped that day. So we'll need a packing slip to document what items were shipped that day. And if the customer has their own scale, a current scale calibration certificate goes a long way. If a customer takes the time to gather all of this information and send it to a carrier, carriers are more likely to review it. And some, honestly, will just change it because the time was taken to pull all those documents and submit to them. If it's worth your time to submit it, they realized, hey, we may have made an error. They know as well as we do, it's that human element you were talking about. Mistakes happen. There are also occasions where we're able to go back to the carrier without documents or reaching out to customers because the change that was made is so far in left field. Even they are like, yeah, something's wrong.
So really, it's worth the effort. And working with carriers is a good thing. In fact, you might find, hey, just by reaching out, they're paying attention to me and they may help you out. So try it. Is a really good first step. Like with most anything, the journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first one, as Confucius kind of said, I think. I don't know. But anyway, now that we know the challenges and considerations of effective freight invoice auditing and how to work with carriers a little bit better, what would be the benefits beyond increased carrier communication and collaboration to shippers who do more frequent auditing?
The advantage to shippers who do more auditing is the more you audit, the more errors on the carrier side you could potentially find and save yourself those additional charges. But with that, there needs to be a balance of going through each invoice with a fine-tooth comb and not finding anything. There is often a lot of invoices that are audited accurately and billed accurately by the customer or by the carrier. The cost of having someone looking at every single invoice may outweigh the additional charges that you find. You need to be able to cruise through the invoice and automate it as much as you can, which 3PLs like us are able to do. We have systems in place to where the number that we actually have to manually touch is down to 20 to 25%. Only about 10 to 15% of those are valid re-ratable charges that our customers see. There's a good amount of invoices our customers never see that we dispute on their behalf that the carrier billed incorrectly that was not valid, saving them time, money on their end that we do that they will never know.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think sometimes when the customer service team, you want a proactive customer service team, but at the same time, you don't always want to hear about problems from the customer service team. Sometimes you just want them to take care of it or resolve it. So I get that. Maybe sometimes hearing from the customer service team is a good thing, but we try to offer a balance of both, of proactive management, but also just simply taking care of it on their behalf. Okay, so Dan, one final piece of advice. What would you say to those shippers who aren't actively thinking about freight invoice auditing and what that could mean to their business long term?
I would ask them, do you value money? I mean, fortunately,
I think they do. I'm going to guess they do, Dan. I guess they do.
And I know that's probably putting it a little bluntly, but there is shippers that will just pay the invoice as it is, no questions asked, no matter the difference. And it really does astound me how often we see that. my phone bill will change by $2, and I question it since I've been here because I haven't found the money tree yet, and just feel like, oh, I'll just pay it. They got to be doing something right
for fun.
Yeah, I must have missed something. Carriers are going to find any way they can to raise revenue, especially in our current climate. In a way, they nickel and dime the customers any way they can. We do our best to mitigate it, fight it, and push back. In the long term, if they know you do not audit and will pay what is invoiced, they will raise your rates and add additional charges as much as they can. It's going to affect your costs. It's going to affect your customers. Eventually, you will question why your shipping charges are getting out of control. That's when they need to call us. That's when we see a lot of customers reaching out to us going, hey, this isn't making sense. Not only are we normally able to have better rates than what they can get directly, but we do this auditing and can help them protect their money from being gouged away.
Yeah. The worst is to be nickeled and dimed. And, the reality is, we're all trying to make as much money and save as much money as possible. And sometimes, kind of like when people started cutting the cable cord, right? We started to see that cable bill kind of inch up year after year. And at a certain point, it was like, why am I paying this much? And we start looking at the details of that, looking at different fees, and you kind of go, all right, it's time to cut the cord. And, I know carriers don't want to be cut out of a shipper's database because they want to be profitable, and shippers don't want to be cutting out carriers. And so I think the final point is that, I know at Ceresys, we're working really hard to balance the relationship between two, because the better all parties work, as I said before, the better for all parties involved. So, Dan, really appreciate you kind of coming in here today and letting the listeners know a little bit about how we go about, our customer service at Ceresys, and then specifically freight invoice auditing, and how shippers should really kind of think about that and the processes involved as a way to reduce total shipping costs. And so, thanks again for coming on and imparting your wisdom upon the listeners of the Freight Project podcast, Dan. And I know you got some teams to manage and lead over there and invoices to audit. It's Wednesday, so it is Invoice Day, so I'll let you get back right to it.
All right. Thanks, Adam.
Take care. And for all of our listeners there on the Freight Project podcast, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you on the next episode.